Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, founder and editor of Native News Online and your host. On January 20th, it was announced as President Joe Biden was leaving office that he had commuted the sentence of Leonard Peltier, who many of us in Indian country, across Indian country, view as a political prisoner. And one of his staunchest supporters, someone he's worked very, very hard to help get the release, is Holly Cook Macarro. She is a member of the Red Lake Nation, and we're going to talk to her. And let's get to the bottom of it. Holly, welcome back to Native Bidaské. It's always good to have you here.
Miigwech, Levi, it's good to see you.
Yes. And Holly, before we get going, can you kind of distinguish between a pardon in the clemency that President Biden gave Leonard Peltier, so that some of the people who are not legal scholars in that, because some people thought he was completely released. Could you explain that for us?
Sure, no problem. The powers under executive grants of clemency cover anything from a commutation, a pardon, a reprieve. There are, I think, 4 or 5 different classifications there, the most common being the pardon and the commutations. And a pardon addresses the crime that was committed and that for which they've been convicted. A commutation merely commutes the remainder of their sentence to time, and it commutes their sentence to time served and allows them to go home. Now, President Biden did something extra. So I'll back up just a little bit. For Leonard Peltier, President Biden did not address his culpability for the crimes for which he was convicted, and that would have been the pardon. But he did commute his sentence to time served, and as allowing him to go home and will serve. This is really an extraordinary commutation. He will serve the remainder of his time at home under home confinement. So this is somewhat extraordinary grant of clemency, and we are working with the Bureau of Prisons and relevant authorities to make sure that Leonard is very well aware of what the parameters of that home confinement are and what sort of monitoring and that he will be subject to. But again, it is extraordinary. There was also an effective date of 30 days out. All of President Biden's grants of clemency either had 30, 60, or 90 days with no real rhyme or reason that many of us could tell. And Leonard's was 30 days out, so that his release date is February 18th.
Mm-hmm. And then he will go to be under house or home confinement for the rest of his life unless something radically changes. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. And tell me this, 49 years he's been confined. He's 80 years old. And we have at Native News Online been keeping up on this case for many, many years. And his health is really failing. He's an 80-year-old man. What's he feeling like right now? Have you talked to him? Is he elated? I'm sure he is, but tell us what the interaction with Leonard has been.
Yes, I talked to him a couple of days ago, and he's in good spirits and just very excited. He's organizing his things, packing up his paintbrushes and other belongings, and he's a little frustrated with the 30-day implementation date. So he's anxious to get home and making plans to reach out and see everyone when he gets home. But in regards to his health, I think that's been a main message of our efforts to win his freedom, is that he is in such poor health. He has an aortic aneurysm. He has type 2 diabetes. He has some newly developed health conditions as well that will need to be addressed. So he plans to go home and see his home on the Turtle Mountain Reservation, and then immediately will probably in that area of the country, the IHS sends you down to Fargo, so for additional care. So he will see the doctor immediately upon returning home.
Okay, and then truly, somebody who's been confined for 49 years, I'm sure there's grandchildren and great grandchildren he's never seen, and so what a time for his family to actually celebrate and be able to physically give him a hug, and so it's going to be a joyous time that way. Uh, are there things in the works legally to maybe get him a new trial, or is it best left undone at this point? I'm trying to make it plain so our audience really understands what some of the options are.
Well, it's long been understood, each of Leonard's appeals went all the way to the Supreme Court, and his legal options were exhausted, decades ago. There is obviously, Leonard has an interest in clearing his name. He was never really a fan of a grant of clemency, and he would have much preferred a pardon, given all of the evidence all of the information that has come forward since he was convicted, the exculpatory ballistic evidence, the prosecutorial constitutional violations that took place, and his extradition from Canada, which was based on coerced testimony. All of those things weigh on Leonard, and he has always maintained his innocence, which really is probably part of the reason that he was in prison for so long. He'll be a month shy of 50 years when he's released, or just actually a couple of weeks. It would have been March 2nd, I believe. So yes, after that long, I think he's mostly looking forward to getting home, but he does also want to tell his own story. He has not been allowed to speak publicly for over 30 years. And he's done, some kind of phone calls that have been broadcast, etc. But no real long interview. So he does want to tell his story and address some of these things that are still out there.
Well, I'm happy. I look forward to having the opportunity to interview him because, as I said, I've covered this case and read about it even before I became a journalist. So, and I've always been a supporter of his release, and so. And so much so, the FBI agent that was in charge of the case would tell the likes of Dennis Banks and Clyde, "Who is this Levi Rickert guy? And what is he doesn't know anything about this and all that?" And so I was kind of thought it was kind of a badge of honor, actually. But
exactly.
Hey, tell me this though. Your husband Mark was on Air Force One with President Biden and had the opportunity to tell him that Leonard was, in fact, a survivor of Indian boarding school, the very reason they were on the plane flying to Phoenix on the Gila River the next day when the president gave the apology for the government's treatment of Native students in Indian boarding schools. Can you tell us what you know? Now, you were not on the plane, right? Just to be clear.
No, I was on Southwest.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
Okay. Hubby was on Air Force One, you were on Southwest. Oh, that's great. However it works, that worked out well. But tell us this from your perspective so that those who are not familiar with it, and I know we publish it in Native News Online, but not everybody reads Native News Online like they should. But tell us what happened.
Well, Mark got the call the weekend before that he was invited to fly on Air Force One, along with, I think it was 5 other tribal leaders from around the country. And he was going in his role as president of the National Congress of American Indians. And so obviously they were told they would have an opportunity to visit with the president. And so he brought up, there are 5 over the years. NCAI has passed 5 resolutions in support of various forms of release for Leonard, whether it was parole or compassionate release or clemency. And so standing on those resolutions, Mark chose to speak with the president about their Indian country's support for clemency for Leonard Peltier, and let him know that he had been denied kind of an internal compassionate release in the spring. He had been denied parole in July, And then the appeal of his parole was denied a month later, which was no surprise because the appeals board for parole is the Parole Commission. So another quirk of the justice system for Indians and anybody who's eligible for parole. But on that, so he had the opportunity to talk with the president. He, you know, we talked the evening before, and we've never, Indian country has always lost out to FBI's opposition to Leonard Peltier's clemency or release in whatever form that took. And their voice was always either the last one in the room or most impactful. And so, you know, there's all the evidence, all the information had been submitted in the clemency petition. So Mark chose to address, you know, what we expected Director Ray to bring up with the president in opposition to Leonard's release. And so really took the time to address that, and also address that that Leonard was a boarding school survivor, one of the oldest that are still alive, actually. So he didn't know that. That was new information for him. And we understand that was a key part of his consideration, along with the injustice of the case. And so he had I think 10-15 minutes they each did to visit with the president, and the president asked him, as he was describing Indian country support, he said, did he have a jury trial, which gave Mark the opportunity to talk about the shenanigans during the trial, and why that was problematic, and really, such a huge part of Leonard's story. And so the president made the commitment on that flight that he promised to look at it, that he would take a look at it, which was really key, because we learned a couple of weeks later that the clemency petition hadn't been sent over to the White House. And the White House was saying, well, the president's not going to review anything that hasn't been sent over from the pardon attorney at the Department of Justice. The process is kind of a very closed one for clemency. And so Mark and several other tribal leaders, Vice Chair Robbie McGee from Porch Band and representing USET, and President Starr comes out from Pine Ridge, and Nick Tilson and I from Indian Collective, and a few other tribal leaders, all went to the Department of Justice and really pressed them to send over the clemency petition. And so we were able to get a commitment from the pardon attorney. And it was extraordinary, because the pardon attorney doesn't normally take meetings on individual cases. But because of that commitment on the plane and our update of the clemency petition, which had some new information in terms of his record of denial, etc., we were able to successfully get that clemency petition sent over. But at the end of the day, it was still the Department of Justice representing the FBI's voice that was the most against this up until the very last day. And we understand that they never let up.
Well, that's an incredible story, and I'm glad you told it, Holly, because especially as it relates to our history, which is really American history, but American Indian history, that's just such an important thing, and so significant. And that I'm proud of what your husband did, and it was just like I just think that story needs to be told over and over again, because you and I both know people for decades. Dennis Banks told me how they used to fight for Leonard's release, and he told me, I asked him point blank, one is Leonard innocent? And he said, yes, he is. And then I said, do you think that the government will ever let him out? And he said, Levi, I have no faith in the federal government. They will never release Leonard Peltier, and it's going to happen. And so, and Joe Biden being such an institutional president, I'll be honest with you, I was a little shocked he did it. And I'm pleased he did it, but I just thought he was such a straight line. He's been integral part of the federal government for almost 50 years himself, and So all's well ends well, in whereas Leonard did not get the full pardon, it was still, I think that is win-win for Indian country, and
I think the foundational day that we began the success to that path towards the success with Biden was the day that Deb Haaland was confirmed as cabinet secretary.
yeah.
She was supportive of release for Leonard in her time as in Congress, and she, there were a lot of people that really wanted to see Secretary Haaland fail in that spot, and she didn't. She was the face of climate change issues and carried so much weight for the administration during her time and did it well and earned the respect of the president. And all feedback. And I was, talking to folks that had contacts at every level of the White House. And that the feedback was that she had earned the respect of the president and her opinion is highly valued. So Secretary Haaland's conversations and support with the president were key in moving this forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Secretary Haaland, because I think she did a tremendous job and represented, overall the department, obviously the Interior Department, but representation matters, and she represented Indian country so well, and we can always be proud of what she did. And I think we had a moment during the Biden administration, and we have to figure out how to keep some momentum going, even though it's looking kind of bleak these days. But I know, Holly, you're a tremendous staunch supporter of Indian country. You always have been, and just having that voice out there, I really appreciate everything you've done, and look forward to seeing you soon. I know I'll be at NCAI in a couple weeks, I guess it is already, and I'll see you there. But and we're looking forward to when Leonard gets released. So thank you very much for coming on today. And you have any last words?
I do. There were decades of people who worked on freeing Leonard Peltier before me, and some of them have passed on and didn't get to see this day. And so while Nick Tilson and I, get to stand by him when Leonard is released, we are very much on the shoulders of generations of activism and those who kept Leonard's story at the front, and that groundwork and all of that work over all of these years. This is a multi-generational effort in Indian country that we can all be proud of. Right? There are thousands who had a voice and a role in making sure that Leonard would one day get to go home. And I'm humbled that I got to help bring it across the finish line, but certainly always aware of everyone who came before, and want to make sure that we recognize that and keep everyone in our thoughts.
And I love that analogy, because I've been telling people that. I said they helped get it over that finish line, and so many people have been carrying that ball for so many years, and it's really great, and it's time to celebrate. And as we Native News Online this year has adopted a new tagline. It's warrior journalism, defending tribal sovereignty, and I think that is really appropriate for the times we're living in. Is that we're warriors, right? Historically, we've been warriors. Leonard was a warrior. Dennis Banks was a warrior, and we may not have always liked everything that AIM did, but I tell people sometimes, they ask me, "What do you think about AIM?" I said, "Well, AIM is to me like the CIA. I don't always agree with everything they do, but I'm glad they're there. I'm glad that AIM was there, and Dennis and Clyde and Russell." They all fought for us and really helped get us some recognition that was really needed back in the 1970s. And look where we are now. And someone said, "What gives you hope, Levi?" I said, 25, 30 years ago, there were only less than 200 Native American attorneys. I said, now there's about 2,000, 2,500. I said, that gives me hope, because when we need to fight our battles in courts, we now have some trained Native American lawyers that can go in there and fight it. They know Indian law, and so we do have a lot of things to be hopeful for, even though we may not like this administration or that administration, but we have to be hopeful. We got to keep the hope alive. Borrowing from Jesse Jackson. They'll keep hope alive.
Absolutely. You know, Jesse Jackson was helpful again, you know, and made a call as well. So also representing kind of the intergenerational, but certainly the American Indian movement was a time of awakening in Indian country.
Yes.
And you know, that Leonard did not ever get to really participate and reap the benefits of that I think awakening that they ignited. So being able, I was able to sit, and I told you this earlier, at the premiere of the Free Leonard Peltier movie at Sundance last weekend with Kevin McKiernan, who had so much of the archival footage, and with Dino Butler, who was acquitted on self-defense grounds he was principally charged along with Bob Rubidoux for the murders that Leonard was found guilty of, aiding and abetting them, and Mark Tilson and Bruce Ellison, who was Leonard's first attorney. And I really felt as if I had stepped back in time, but they're also looking forward to having a good visit with Leonard. And I think it's an extraordinary time, and I think this represents an opportunity to tell the story of that time period to America. You know, Secretary Haaland always said part of her priorities at the department was to tell the real history of America. Part of that was the boarding schools. Part of that is the railroading of Leonard Peltier that represents, you know, something so much of Indian country can relate to in this justice system in America.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Holly. And we continue this episode talking about the release of Leonard Peltier. Joining us is Kevin Sharp, who served several years as the attorney trying to get the release of Leonard Peltier. And he's a former judge. Quite frankly, he became a friend of mine working together. We'd cover it, and I'd call him sometimes Saturday nights, and he'd always call me right back. And Kevin Sharp, welcome to Native Bidaské, and joining us, you know Holly, good friend of yours, Holly Cook Macarro. And I think we're all celebrating the good news that the former President Biden did on January 20th. And the announcement came out on the 20th. It actually happened on the 19th, right? And so welcome to Native Bidaské, Kevin, and tell me how you're feeling.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm feeling great for two reasons. One is I don't get to see Holly enough, and I don't get to see you enough. And so here I am. I got both of you in one place.
Well, that's great.
That's great. I'm excited about that. And, you know, this how I feel about Leonard's release, it's this mixed emotions of, one, elated, and then two, just relief that, you know, I was on this for 5 years, right at around 5 years, and you just thought, I always had the feeling it was going to happen, but there was also this bit of reality around there that, look, there are powerful forces that are opposed to this. And what makes you think that you can get it done? My confidence level went way up, though, when Holly came on board, and Nick Tilson and the folks at Indian Collective. And all of a sudden you just knew, okay, this always needed to be Native led to bring this home and finish this. But then you really had superstars step in. And there's no way that this happens without that core group of people coming in over the last few years. Actually, Holly, how long has it been?
3 for me.
3. So 3 years, right?
A lifetime for Nick.
Yeah, right. But we were working on this for 3 years, and just it had to happen that way. It was the only way it was going to happen.
Well, Kevin, if you don't mind, we kind of covered some of the history of what happened on the plane with Air Force One. When Holly was on Southwest, her husband was on Air Force One. That's cute. But I want to back up to, I love that story of how you were brought these boxes, right? Because I think it's I want to hear from a federal judge, which you are, why you even took the case and why you think Leonard was innocent. Because there are some people out there, I'm just being honest, they just say, well, you know, Biden is old, he should have never let this happen. And no, tell me why you think Leonard Peltier is innocent and why you even got involved with this as a former district federal judge.
Well, right. Well, thanks, because it really kind of puts everything that happened for me into context. And my reasons for getting involved evolve into this history lesson that has really changed my life and my way of thinking about this country. So I stepped down from the federal bench. I was appointed as a district court judge. That's the trial level judge in our federal system. I was appointed by President Obama. And as I am fulfilling my duty, and I take an oath to support and defend the Constitution as part of becoming a federal judge. I had taken that oath before, though. I took it when I became an attorney back in the 90s, and I took it when I joined the United States Navy back in the 80s. So 3 times I had raised my right hand and sworn to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I took that obligation seriously. When I left the bench over my some always complicated on why people do what they do and change jobs, but I left the bench in part because of my concern about the criminal justice system. And I had sentenced a young man named Chris Young to 2 life terms on a nonviolent drug offense. That was wrong. They were mandatory minimums. I didn't have a choice. And when I stepped down from the bench, I started working with Chris to get clemency. And ultimately, President Trump signed clemency papers, and Chris was released. But Willie Nelson's ex-wife, Connie, had read a story about me being at the White House with Kim Kardashian and Van Jones talking about criminal justice issues. And she thought, well, maybe here's someone who can help with this administration. And so I was sent just, reams of information. I got boxes of stuff about this trial and about this case, court transcripts, opinions, newspaper articles, photographs, everything that is part of the AIM story, part of the Leonard Peltier Pine Ridge story. All of that ends up on my desk, and I don't know that story. I have vague recollections. It's hard, at the time that Wounded Knee happened, I was 10. By the time Pine Ridge happens, I'm 12. This was not on my radar. I'm playing baseball in the summers in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm not really concerned about what's happening in South Dakota or any of that area, and it does not affect me. So when I see this information, when it's sent to me in 2018, 2019, I'm looking at this for the first time, and I'm looking at this as a former federal judge. And so I have no dog in this fight. I don't know anything about it. I just began reading the paperwork that's sent to me. And it just comes flooding over me as I'm reading this. What the hell? How did this happen? It just becomes clear to me from the very beginning that all of the constitutional protections are thrown out. And it's just kind of, they start stacking up on what was wrong with this case. And so the what happened was easy for me. What then, became the most disturbing part was the why and the how. And that's the part that became a real learning experience for me to understand the American Indian movement and why the American Indian movement was necessary. And, you couldn't understand what happened at Pine Ridge in 75 if you didn't understand what happened at Wounded Knee in 73. And you couldn't understand Wounded Knee in 73 without understanding Wounded Knee in 1890. And you couldn't understand any of that without having this more generalized knowledge of the United States government, their relationship with, if you call it a relationship, that interaction with the native and the indigenous peoples that were here and what happened and our treaties, right? So it's one thing to go, okay, this group of people landed on this rock and now they're going to have these interactions that don't go so well. But then as a government, we sign agreements and we break every single one of them. none of that means anything, and it's all thrown out the window. And all of a sudden, everything that I think I know about the United States and everything that I feel about the United States through my, my limited learning through, high school, to my time as part of the United States Navy, to my time in law school and as a practicing lawyer and on the federal bench, all of that starts getting chipped away and in some places crumbles altogether. And so I have to get involved in this case. If I care at all about what I believe in and this country, I cannot turn away from this. So I apologize for that long answer to your question of how and why.
I like it because
it's all part of it.
Yeah, I like it, Kevin, because it gives context. And so often people these days, they don't really pay full attention, but they really need to pay full attention so they grasp what happened. And so I really appreciate that. And Holly, tell me this. I know you and Kevin are friends, but how integral was the work that Kevin did to help you out, help pass the ball on, so to speak? How integral was that to you, and how helpful was it?
It was absolutely critical. And I think I've called Kevin like every day for almost 3 years, and with some question or another, right? And we both, kind of brought things to the table. But Kevin's knowledge of the system, of his breadth of contacts throughout just the country, really, that we were able to tap into. And at any given point when we had questions, he had the experience of getting Chris Young out. And so guiding our advocacy throughout just wouldn't have been possible without Judge Sharp as a resource and friend to help guide this. This became, I know it's consumed me for the last 3 years, because I wanted to make sure that Leonard was finally free after what happened to him. And I wanted to make sure that it never happened to another Native American again. Mm-hmm. And Judge Sharp's expertise and just caring about the case so much, because he did all of this work pro bono. And so this was, it just would not have been possible without Judge Sharp.
Yeah. And Kevin, this is what she said, you did it pro bono. I've always appreciated that aspect of who you are. It really speaks to who you are, I should say, that as a person, and somebody who really believes in justice. And I love how you've told me that over and over, how you've taken that oath to protect the Constitution, even as a Navy person. I just think that's tremendous, that your work.
Right. It became personal, right? It's part of who I am. My legal background. Right. All of that led me to this place. And if I am who I think I am, how do I turn away from this? Mm-hmm. And after I spend any time with Holly, right, this is more than about Leonard Peltier. How do I turn away from Holly or Mark or Nick? And then those are the individuals, but then this larger community, how do you turn your back on that and not say, Holly, what can I do? What do you need me to do to help this, help us achieve this goal? Because this is not just about Leonard Peltier. And that's why I think the president had to pay attention, and the reason he did pay attention, and the reason that the country, beyond the communities that you think, well, they have a vested interest, and they do, because of the way Native Americans are treated in the judicial system, or really all throughout government. But to make sure that those people who aren't directly affected in that way come to understand that you are directly affected. I don't care if you're the white guy from Memphis, Tennessee. This affects you, and you need to understand why, and why this is important in a much broader context. Mm-hmm. So, it was a privilege for me to be able to work on this case, and really a huge privilege to be considered friends with Holly and Mark and Nick and those people who really carried this over the finish line.
Yeah. And tell me this, Holly, where will you be on February 18th?
Leonard has asked if Nick Chilson and I, who's the founder and CEO of Indian Collective, would bring him home. So we are
Wonderful.
going to go down to Florida and pick him up and bring him home. We're still in the process with working with Judge Sharp to figure out, what those parameters are of his release.
The logistics, yes.
The logistics.
And I would like to be there upon his release, and then we'll go from there. So we'll figure it out. But I know I think it needs some coverage, and then I'll back off. I know some AIM members have called me and said, "Oh, I'm going to be down there." I said, "Well, I don't know. Don't ask me. I'm not in charge." but seriously, separate from this, we'll talk about the logistics, but because it's going to be a joyful day for Indian country. And you kind of touched on it, both of you, is he became iconic to the point where he was a symbol of oppression of Native Americans and throughout history, and the modern day oppression of Leonard. And Kevin, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I was thinking about that his story really hits all of the major elements of making this an iconic story, right? Why was he there? Because he's someone who's trying to help his people, who sees a wrong that's happening at the hands of the government, and he steps in to say, how can I help? And instead, he is turned into a target, right? This is all this extension of COINTELPRO. He's seen as someone speaking out is now seen as subversive. This is someone who is now anti-American, because how dare you speak out against the government? And that then leads him to be a target, not just on the outside, but then inside the judicial system, and how all of these systems lined up to take him, not because he is Leonard Peltier, but because he is Leonard Peltier, who said enough is enough. We're not going to take this. We have rights. We're human beings. And that put a target on him. And that then led him down this path to end up in the federal judicial system, ultimately a federal prison for almost the next 5 decades. And that's why it's such an important story. This is about all of those things, man.
I think about that in terms of that personal interaction that he has missed out on with his family, and I'm sure he has great grandchildren. I know he's never hugged and kissed them. So I'm hoping he can really enjoy his family. And yeah.
The other part of this too, there were 3 people killed that day.
Yes.
Right. And they also missed those opportunities, and they want to, turn that and blame it on Leonard and his 2 co-defendants. That's the wrong place to look. The United States government created this, and then people were killed.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of taking responsibility and trying to learn something from it, they prosecuted someone for it. Mm-hmm. And then when it's not, don't look at us, look at him. Don't look behind this curtain and see what we're doing. Here's this guy. Mm-hmm. Let's turn him into the bad guy. And so their own conduct is not put under a microscope, and we are not given the opportunity that we've missed. Of all the things that Leonard's missed, this country has also missed an opportunity. That agency has missed an opportunity, 5-decade opportunity, to be better, to do better, to make sure that they are carrying out their oaths to protect and defend the Constitution. And that's part of the other piece of this that has always angered me, is that those prosecutors took that same oath. The law enforcement officers took that same oath. And, they threw them away for different reasons, but ultimately they did not care because they had a different goal. And that's not true of all prosecutors, right? I'm not lumping any of them in. I'm saying these individuals who worked on this case or created this environment that caused Pine Ridge to happen, because Pine Ridge was going to happen. It may not happen at Pine Ridge. It may not have happened on that day in June, but all of those forces were lining up so that there was going to be an explosion like this somewhere. And it happened to be there with these individuals. But that misses the larger story of why. And what was the government doing that created this environment that got people killed?
Yeah. And as you were talking, I'm actually thinking, and I want to ask Holly, what's your next cause? But she knows, and she'll know as soon as I say this, is that, with the issue of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and some people call it people, but, that there's an environment that has allowed that to continue, where it's not always the non-native pretty young lady that the media will pay attention to, but our young women are beautiful people too. And so I think that as we move forward, we're going to continue. I know you will, Holly, keep working on MMIW cases and getting involved, because that justice has to come for Native people. So Holly, want to respond to that?
I worked really hard on the expansion of the tribal criminal jurisdiction in the VAWA 2013 and the improvements since then. And those putting those improvements into practice in Indian country has been so difficult because of the lack of infrastructure that we have. So you're right, justice for our Native people in terms of when we go missing, we matter just as much. And, the pain of seeing families who never know what happened to their loved ones is so difficult. But yes, that is something I intend to continue working on, and as we look towards the reauthorization of VAWA again.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for coming on the Native Bidaské. It is a time to celebrate, even though we realize we do have still a lot of work ahead of us to bring justice to Indian country. And Holly, I will say this, I'd be remiss. I really love, excuse me, I love that your husband has brought to the attention the lack of law enforcement throughout Indian country. And as the leader of NCAI, I took note of that last year in his annual address, or State of the Tribal Nations address. And I'm looking forward to hearing what NCAI is going to do to continue that, because we've got to let members of Congress know that you can't serve a reservation that is the size of some states with 4 or 5 law officers. And so just doesn't make sense. And so I applaud, but I guess I'll plural what the Macarros are out there doing for us. So thank you very much. So
thank you, Levi. I'll share that with him.
Yeah, and thank you for our viewers for tuning into this special edition of Native Bidaské, talking about the release of Leonard Peltier, who will be released from federal penitentiary on February 18th. And so it's really a victory for Indian country. So we'll be back next week with another episode of Native Bidaské. In the meantime, give your loved ones a good hug, because this is a good time to celebrate. Chimigwich.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chimigwech.